Welcome to the Timescales Interviews. I'm Grego, your host. Today, in the summer of 2022, we have a very special guest, the extraordinary Will Hadcroft, who is just about to enter history as an official BBC Doctor Who author. Hello there, Mr. Hadcroft.
Hello, Grego. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, sir. How are you doing today?
I'm not too bad, thank you. Yeah, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. So now we're
As
finally
have
doing
I.
it.
Excellent. This interview is being conducted and recorded in the United States and the United Kingdom. I'm in California, and I believe that Mr. Hadcroft is in Edgeworth, England. Is that correct, Mr. Hadcroft?
Yeah, that's right. Edgeworth is a small village on the boundary or the border between Bolton, the town Bolton, Bolton, and Blackburn. So that's in the northwest of England.
Okay.
And
So,
every time, just to cut in a minute, Grego, every time when I watch the Twin Dilemma, Colin Baker's first Doctor Who, and Mestor goes, Edgeworth, I immediately think, well, that's where I live.
that's neat. So, what's it like there today? Is it a little bit warm? Well, what is Edgeworth like?
Well, today it's very gloomy and cloudy and rainy. Not
Okay.
that long ago, we had two really, really hot days that were actually records in this country, 40 degrees. But
Yep.
it didn't last very long. It's gone
Thank
back to being
thank
cloudy and
goodness.
rainy again.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, let's get things started off right to the heart of matters, the very meat, so to speak. On August 4th of 2022, you will enter into and eternally remain in the hallowed grounds of being a Doctor Who author for BBC. Your name, Will Hadcroft, will go down in Doctor Who history with your story titled The Resurrection Plant, which is read by none other than Fraser Hines himself and published by BBC Audio. How exciting is that?
Well, it's very exciting. It's a dream come true, really. To think that I've been trying to get something like this to happen for literally decades, since my teenage years of sending off manuscripts to, first of all, to Andrew Cartmel when the television series was still on in the late 80s, then Virgin Publishing, and then BBC Books, and then Big Finish. So to finally have something accepted and to write a story and work with an editor and be published by a mainstream publisher, BBC Audio, and have an actor from Doctor Who read it,
Right.
and Fraser Hines as well.
Right.
I'm absolutely swept away by it all, really.
Okay.
I'm thrilled and delighted, but somewhat overwhelmed as well at the moment. Things might settle when it's finally come out, and I get to sort of just think about what it is I've achieved.
I see. Okay. So you just touched on our next question a little bit here. Doctor Who fans today in 2022 are blessed in the fact that many of the original actors have made themselves available in audio format with both BBC and Big Finish, such as the late John Pertwee, along with surviving doctors Tom Baker, Peter Davison, Colin Baker, Sylvester McCoy, Paul McGann, and the list goes on. Yet Fraser Hines acted alongside of Patrick Troughton in the 1960s. And he's reading your book, The Resurrection Plant. Did you ever imagine that something like that would ever happen for you and other lovers of Doctor Who?
Yes and no. I'll start with the negative first. Obviously, you're always, if you are a writer, you're obviously hoping that the day is going to come along when you write something that could be and is performed by someone who was in Doctor Who. So either a full cast audio like Big Finish does, where the actors play the parts in a production, or as a talking book, which is what mine is, an audio book where one voice reads everything. So to have Fraser Hines do that, and in the first instance, when he reads the Doctor's dialogue, he does a very good impersonation of Patrick Troughton. But of course, when he reads Jamie's dialogue, he is Jamie. So when
Yes,
Jamie speaks,
that's
it is Jamie.
it's
So
amazing that Fraser Hines can do that.
yeah,
I've heard some of his I call them dramatized performances,
yeah,
uh, and it's shocking how well he can do Patrick Troughton, and then
yeah,
all of a sudden switch to Jamie.
yeah. It's a real gift that. So the negative is on for me personally. You know, would it ever happen to me? Uh, and there have been many years where I've been hoping and thinking, you know, is maybe it's never going to happen. You know, and there are lots of
Mhm.
Doctor Who fans out there who are also writers who will be watching this, who will be wondering the very same thing for themselves.
Mhm.
Um, but on the positives, regarding did any of us ever think it was possible that actors who'd been in the television series might then come back and reprise their roles? I think we did kind of see that in a positive light over the years because we had while the television series was still on, we had radio productions like Slipback. So during Colin Baker's hiatus, the 18-month gap between his first season and his second season, there was a radio story of Doctor Who in which he starred. So we knew it could be done because it was being done.
Mhm.
Um, and there have been other BBC radio productions after the series was cancelled. And then, of course, there are all these fan-produced things. Um,
Right.
we,
Right.
we, we know that the precursor to Big Finish productions, for example, was the audio visuals. And that
Right.
was John Ainsworth, Gary Russell, Nicholas Briggs, Bill Baggs, Alistair Locke, all these
Right.
names that are now famous to us.
Right.
Um,
Weren't those produced
when they,
on cassette tape back in
mm,
the yeah, in the early 90s, I think?
late 80s, I think. I think
Late, okay.
the original series was still running,
Mhm.
and those people weren't too thrilled with the direction it was going in on television. So they got together and said, "Hey, let's make our own Doctor Who."
Right.
And they got anybody who would be willing to participate to join in, and ran off a number of stories that they put on cassette, and they sold them in the dealers' rooms at Doctor Who conventions
Mhm.
uh, for no profit. You know, it's entirely a labor of love.
Mhm.
So whatever you paid for, that would just cover the cost of the cassette tape, and all the productions and acting and writing and everything was done for free. So
Right.
they kind of showed that it could possibly be done by actors who'd been in the series. I think Nabil Shaban, who played Syl in Vengeance on Varos and Mind Warp, he was in one of their audio visuals as a different character. And one or two other Doctor Who people were in them playing different characters. So they were starting to create Big Finish really without realizing it. And then there are people such as myself who I used to make my own Doctor Who audio plays in my bedroom using the sound effects album. And uh, I had the theme music by Jeff Love and his orchestra.
Mhm.
It was on an LP called Themes for Superheroes. And so I used the theme tune that Jeff Love did and the sound effects record. And I made up my own little Doctor Who stories where I was the Doctor and friends and family would be roped in to play various parts.
Really? Really? Wow.
Mm.
That that brings a question to mind. What was the name of that story? Ch Chatta? The
Uh,
Chatta
the,
Factor?
yes, I did that in 2006, I think.
Okay.
Um, I'd found a fan production company, non-profit, again,
Uh-huh.
very much like audio visuals. They were called Fine Line Productions, and a
Okay.
gentleman called Gareth Preston ran it. He was the producer and director. And
Mhm.
they had a gentleman called Joe Binks who played the Doctor, and various people would come along and participate. They were all kind of amateur dramatics
Right.
type people. You know, they acted on stage in local productions and things like that. So he would get these semi-professional actors involved to act out original Doctor Who stories.
Okay.
And I found them. I'd listened to a couple of those stories that they'd already done. And so then I submitted a synopsis and some dialogue for an episode that I wanted to do. And it's spelt Chatath, that
Yeah, that's it. Right.
Chattath, but it's the Greek word. I think it's the Greek word for sin. So
Okay.
Chatath, and the encyclopedia that I got it from, it had these little sort of vowel pointing things to help you pronounce it correctly. And I
Okay.
knew that CH was pronounced K, so I thought it was Chatath. And then and when I saw the vowel pointing system that they were using, it implied there was like an accent over the second A. So it wasn't Chatath, it was Chatath.
Okay.
So I called the story the Chatath Factor. And the idea was it's set in the 19th century, and you have a scientist who is obsessed with evolution and obsessed with progressing mankind beyond its animal origins. And sort of he wants to get rid of the animal side, the carnal side of mankind's nature, so that we become pure in his eyes.
Very interesting.
And he's doing an experiment to create that situation. And it's a bit like a sort of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type idea.
Okay.
But then you have a clergyman in the story who has all the same feelings, but interprets them religiously. So rather than saying, oh, it's the carnal instincts are the animal instincts that we've evolved from, he sees those instincts as sin. And he wants to eradicate sin from humankind. So they both want the same thing, but they're seeing it from two very different points of view. And of course, the scientist who conducts the experiment, instead of getting rid of our carnal desires and animalistic tendencies, it goes the other way and it transforms into a beast. So it's a little bit like Jekyll and Hyde. It's a little bit like the Incredible Hulk, where he can't control the transformations. So I sent that in to Gareth Preston, and he liked the idea, and he commissioned it, and it was all done very professionally, which is something that surprised me at the time.
I would love to hear it. I searched high and low for that, and I was not able to locate it. You said it was from 2006?
Yeah, Fine Line Productions. It may now be hosted by a website called Westlake.
I checked that too. I did check Westlake and was not able to find it there either.
Right. I'll have to check with Gareth and see if it's been discontinued. Maybe it has.
Okay.
If it's been relocated, I'll send you a link so that you can have a listen. But that's the very first Doctor Who audio that I properly wrote as a script, and to be performed by a cast. And even though that was an amateur thing, that was really exciting, actually. I mean, it wasn't BBC audio and it wasn't Big Finish Productions, but just the idea of writing dialogue for characters and writing directions for the sound effects and background music and all of that. And then some months later, you put it on, put the CD on, and there it is, and you've got a cast performing what you've written. It's a wonderful feeling to accomplish something like that, and I'm very grateful to Gareth for giving me that opportunity all those years ago.
Very interesting. Very interesting. You and I are similar ages, as we have determined, with us having half a century plus under our belts, so to speak. Do you recall watching broadcast TV episodes from the Patrick Troughton era? And in particular, did you ever happen to catch any of the now missing and presumed wiped TV episodes, which just so happened to be very unfortunate when it comes to Patrick Troughton's era?
Well, first of all, I was born in 1970. So Patrick Troughton's era came to an end the year before. All the black and white episodes were from 63 to 69. and then it went into colour in 1970 with John Pertwee.
Right.
So I was born towards the end of the first season of John Pertwee.
Okay.
So I never saw Patrick Troughton broadcast originally.
Okay. Did they do replays of them?
They did one in 1981.
Really?
It was after Tom Baker had left. So in March 1981, Logopolis was broadcast. We see him regenerate into Peter Davison at the end. And the producer, John Nathan Turner, was concerned that young children, I mean, I was 10 when Logopolis was broadcast. I was just approaching my 11th birthday. So children of our generation back then, a lot of them couldn't remember anybody else ever playing the Doctor, because Tom Baker did it for 7 years. I was 4 when he took it over from John Pertwee, and approaching my 11th birthday when he gave it to Peter Davison. So John Nathan Turner was worried that children would reject Peter Davison because they'd only known Tom Baker. So he made an arrangement with the controller of the second BBC channel, BBC Two, to run a repeat season called The Five Faces of Doctor Who. And the idea was that, because obviously the old Doctor Who's in Britain was serialized. So a 90-minute story was split into 4 21.5-minute episodes. So what they decided to do for this season was run one story per Doctor per week. So the first week would be Monday to Thursday, and it would be An Unearthly Child and the Caveman episodes that week to demonstrate William Hartnell. And then the second week, it was the Crotons with Patrick Troughton. So that was the first time I'd seen Patrick Troughton play the Doctor, and the first time I'd seen Jamie and Zoe.
In 1981.
I already knew about them, of course, because my parents told me about the previous Doctor Who's. My mother didn't like the way Tom Baker played it. She thought he was making a mockery of it, particularly in the season 17 and the Douglas Adams type stuff. She didn't like any of that. She used to always say, oh no, William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton were the best. So I knew something of the history. And then in 1979, Marvel Comics began publishing Doctor Who Weekly, which is the precursor to Doctor Who magazine. And back then, it really was a children's comic. You know, it wasn't a magazine full of features and interviews. It was a news page called Gallifrey Guardian, which was just one page, little bits of features about the program's past, and then comic strips. There was a comic strip featuring Tom Baker and the then current lineup, and then they had another comic strip called Tales from the TARDIS, which had nothing to do with Doctor Who. It would have Tom Baker's face narrating the opening of a classic story like Jekyll and Hyde, and then the comic strip would tell the story of Jekyll and Hyde. So I was starting to, with Doctor Who Weekly, I was starting to get a sense of the program's history. So when the Five Faces season came in the autumn, the fall of 1981, that's when I started to get a more complete picture. Doctor Who was not just Tom Baker, it was something much bigger and much broader. And that was the first time I saw Patrick Troughton and that lineup of companions as well, Jamie and Zoe.
Well, for some reason, I just assumed that all throughout the 1970s that there would have been constant reruns of the William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton eras, and I'm shocked that that's not the case. Wow.
No, there were none. What they would do in the 70s is they would run the current season, and then when it had ended, across the summer months, because it used to run from September to March in Britain in the 1970s, particularly in the Tom Baker era, I'm talking now. You had 26 half-hour episodes from September to the following March, and the whole of the winter, basically. And then in the summer months, they would repeat a handful of those serials that had been broadcast in the winter. They would repeat them in the following summer in the lead up to the next series. Uh,
Okay.
so you never got any of the really old stuff, none of the black and white stuff, or even any of the
Wow.
not even any of the John Pertwee stuff. You know,
Right.
I didn't see John Pertwee till the Five Faces season.
In
They showed,
1981.
yeah, they showed
Yeah.
Carnival of Monsters in the third week, and
Yep.
the fourth week was the Three Doctors, which I absolutely loved to see the
Okay.
three of them together. And in the fifth week, they repeated Logopolis to show Tom Baker becoming Peter Davison at the end. And obviously Peter would be the fifth face of Doctor Who. And I think that was sort of November, December when that was shown. And then Peter Davison's first episode of Castrovalva was January 1982.
Okay.
So it worked because what John Nathan Turner wanted was to show children there had been other actors playing the Doctor before Tom Baker. So
Okay.
that season, it did its job, because when January came along, we all accepted Peter Davison.
Nice. Okay. Now, I'm not familiar with when the Patrick Troughton episodes started being released on, I guess it would have been VHS tape.
Yeah.
And I think, well, England had its own format, which is PAL,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
the US has NTSC.
Yeah.
When that was happening, I'm guessing in the 90s, did that give you an opportunity to get caught up on any Patrick Troughton episodes that you had not seen?
Well, I can remember the first release. It may even have been in the late 1980s when
Oh,
the program was still on air. So we would have been like Colin Baker, Sylvester McCoy time. And
right.
they were starting to release. The very first VHS release was Revenge of the Cybermen with Tom
Okay.
Baker.
Okay.
And they showed it as a TV movie. So the four parts were knitted together into one long feature.
Right.
Is that how you received it in the States, Gregor? Did you have
Well,
it as one complete story each time?
I believe so. And the interesting thing about that is I had to get a PAL VCR, which was very expensive. I remember being so excited that I was going to be able to watch some of the older episodes that I'd never seen before, that I went and ordered a couple of tapes from England, only to find out that they don't work here because they
Yeah,
were in PAL format. So
yeah.
um, to solve that, I went ahead and got a PAL VCR.
Yeah.
That was not cheap to have that thing shipped. This
I bet.
huge. It probably weighed 40 pounds.
Yeah.
Uh, and I hooked that up only to find out that this still doesn't work. And then I had to actually get a PAL TV, and that was very expensive to have shipped from England. But once you get into a project like that, you can't
Yeah.
stop. You need to just go ahead
Well,
and
you want to watch
finish.
those tapes, don't you? You
You want
know,
to watch them, yeah.
you've
And
ordered them and they don't work. Yeah.
yeah, and I finally remember being able to watch those on this little PAL television, and
Yeah.
it was great. And I believe you are correct. I don't think that those original tapes were in an episodic format. I think that they had been attached in a movie format.
Yeah.
But
I think that's the trouble when you have people who are in charge of a range like that, but they're not fans themselves. They don't understand how fans think. So
uh-huh.
from a marketing point of view, they would think, well, they don't want all the individual episodes with the opening and closing credits coming on and going off and coming on and going off.
Oh, no, no, no. Yes, we
But
do.
but
Yes,
we
we
do.
do.
And I remember we made our feelings felt in the letters pages of Doctor Who magazine, and some of those early ones, well, all those early ones were eventually reissued in episodic format because that's what
Uh-huh.
we wanted and we said so. But
Right.
going back to your original question about the black and white stuff and Patrick Troughton, the first one that came out was The Seeds of Death. You know, the Ice Warriors invading the moon base and the T-Mat, the Transmat storyline.
Right.
That was the first one, and that was a 6-part story, and that was all put together into like a 3-hour film.
Right.
And it was a slog to get through that. I remember being so excited when I remember walking into my local Woolworths store, and I hadn't gone in there to buy a Doctor Who thing, but I just saw the cassette on top of this wardrobe, this closet.
Oh,
And I
nice.
said to the store assistant, "Is that for sale?" Because I saw the diamond logo. Doctor
Right.
Who fans can see that a mile away, can't they?
Right.
Your radar
In
homes in on it.
Woolworths, of all
Yeah.
places.
Woolworths, yeah. It was,
Yeah.
and it wasn't with any other videos either. It was just with a load of other things. And my Doctor Who radar saw the diamond logo, and then I saw Patrick Troughton at the controls of the TARDIS on the cover.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, wow, because I hadn't seen Patrick Troughton since The Five Faces of Doctor Who in 1981.
1981, yeah.
So this would have been, I don't know when it came out, late 1980s. So a good 5 or 6 years had elapsed. And so I just said to the store assistant, "Is that for sale?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "Right, get it."
Nice.
And
There we go.
I remember just putting it on at home, and that sort of kaleidoscope title sequence, and
Mhm.
seeing his face come through the way it does, and just thinking, this is fantastic, Liz.
Oh, yeah.
And then when it came out in episodic form later, and vid-fired as well, that process vid-fire where they clean up the picture and the
Yeah.
sound.
Yep.
So it's as crisp as it would have been in the 1960s. I really grew to appreciate that. So I've kind of had a bit of well, we all have, all of my generation in England, who are Doctor Who fans. We all started with the Crotons in the Five Faces season, and then the Seeds of Death VHS tape, and then now we've got everything that's available. We've got it.
Finally,
But in those
yeah.
days, it was so rare, and it always felt special when you found something like
Doctor Who
that.
fans have definitely been taught patience over
Yeah,
the years, and we're used to waiting,
yeah,
even if something takes years. So, who is your doctor?
right. Well, I would say I have two favorite Doctors, and they're both from the classic series, and they both share the surname Baker. So Tom Baker, as I said earlier, was the Doctor. Well, you attend not primary school, nursery or kindergarten, and then you go to primary school after that. So age 4 or 5, thereabouts. So I began my primary school life age 5, and I left primary school to transition to secondary school at age 11. So for the whole of my primary school life, Tom Baker was the Doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And he really was my hero. I was quite a sensitive and timid child, very imaginative and thoughtful and kind-hearted. I don't want to blow my own trumpet there, but I was a sensitive boy, and prone to being bullied as a result.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to watch Tom Baker breezing through these situations, like in the City of Death, where the butler pushes him off his feet and he falls over.
Right.
And Tom
Right.
Baker says, "What a wonderful butler. He's so violent." And those kind of scenes made life easier for me, because I used to wish I could be like that. I used to wish I just didn't care about the bullies in the way that Tom Baker didn't seem to care. So I used to draw some comfort from that. And I used to wish I was like him. Then, of course, we go to Peter Davison. And although I was becoming more of a fan of the program during the Peter Davison years, because now we had the Doctor Who Monthly, we had some repeats of the old stuff, and now we were into a new Doctor. And I was also quite taken with the change in the title sequence and the theme music. That really hit me quite deep. The sudden change
Oh, that was a
from
big one there.
from
Yeah.
Delia Derbyshire to Peter Howell, and
Yeah.
the title
Yeah.
sequences as well. And I was becoming more interested in how television was being made. So I was a fan of Doctor Who as a complete package, but not so much of Peter's performance, because I felt that he wasn't eccentric enough and he wasn't strange enough. I appreciate now, years later, that that was a deliberate decision to contrast him against Tom Baker.
Mhm.
But at the time, at age 11, it didn't feel quite right that Doctor Who should be almost like an ordinary man.
Right.
So when Colin Baker succeeded him in 1984, I mean, in March 84, I was 13 3/4. And when Colin Baker sat up at the end of the Caves of Androzani and said, "Change, my dear, and it seems not a moment too soon," and the
Yep.
closing music comes crashing in, I can remember thinking, "Oh, this is more like it."
Yeah, there
And
we go.
I
And did
became, I was instantly a fan, instantly a
didn't
fan of Colin Baker.
when he sat up like that, wasn't Perry right behind him?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. And then
That's
she's, clearly stunned by what's happened, this
right,
sudden transformation.
right. That
And
was a
when she
very
said,
dramatic one.
yeah,
Mm.
and especially because when Peter is, dying, as it were, winding down, and he says, "Is this death?" It's a
Right.
very dramatic moment, as you say, and very, you're on the edge of your seat watching that. And then he says, "I might regenerate, I don't know." And then you get all that computer graphic stuff with the faces calling out to him from the past, and the master's face filling the screen,
Right.
screaming that he should die. And then suddenly it all explodes, and Colin Baker sits up. Uh, Very
Yeah, you
stunning.
talk about that. That was a very dramatic regeneration.
Yeah.
And you were
And
watching that live as it happened on television.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
nice.
yeah. I know that you guys had to search for it in the States. You were looking at PBS stations and it was
Yeah,
moving around the
we had
schedules.
to wait. We had to wait. Part of our lesson in patience there.
Yeah,
PBS would they wouldn't broadcast them in order some of the time. In fact, I don't
yeah,
know if that was the case all of the time, but I know that they were not broadcast in order. And that particular Peter Davison to Colin Baker regeneration,
mm,
um, I I believe I would have seen that around 1988 or 1989.
wow, yeah,
I wasn't able to watch it live like you,
yeah.
but that's very interesting.
So that was
Uh,
84 for us, um,
okay,
the original
so
broadcast.
so I guess it took a couple of years to get here,
Yeah.
um,
But
on
I loved
PBS.
Colin because obviously now I was a teenager and I was now in secondary school. And
Okay.
if you're a boy who is obsessed with science fiction things, and especially things like Doctor Who and Blake Seven, which are made on the cheap. The special effects are pretty ropey. The sets, there's not a great deal of detail in the set design, and you've got costumes that don't look great and monsters that are not convincing. And American productions are being broadcast on other channels like Buck Rogers in the 25th Century.
Right.
That was broadcast on ITV, which is the main opposing channel, when Tom Baker's last season was being screened on BBC One. So Logopolis and Keeper of Track and all that stuff was going out opposite Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. And over here, Doctor Who was starting to feel a bit cheap. It was
Hmm.
it was being ridiculed by, not by fans, but by the general public, because compared to American productions, it looked very cheap. So if
Okay.
you were a Doctor Who fan going to secondary school, in your early teens, you would be ridiculed by your classmates for being a fan of it. And if you
Hmm.
had certain traits on the autism spectrum, if like so you're obsessive, you find it difficult to interact socially, you're awkward around people, um, very, very shy and introvert. Um, you've got it all going on in your head, but you don't say much. You again are a target for the bullies, and at secondary school, they're more vicious, you know,
Okay.
than they would have been at primary school. It goes beyond name calling at secondary school. So I used to be quite angry inside. I never demonstrated it really, but inside I felt it. And when I saw how Colin was playing the Sixth Doctor, you know, he's quite angry, and he's not really interested in the trivial things of life as he sees them. He's more interested in the minutiae, the detail. He doesn't have great social skills. He'll say things that can be perceived as quite rude and direct and blunt.
Yep.
Had terrible dress sense, but thought he looked great, you know.
Right. Arrogant.
Yeah.
That's
had an arrogance. And I had quite a bit of that going on in me at age 14 and 15 and 16, you know, the period where he played the Doctor. So Colin Baker became my hero in my teens, not because he was somebody I wished I was like, but because I felt like I was like him. It felt like a slightly exaggerated version of what I was like as a real person. I probably wasn't like that. I probably didn't come across like that. But inside,
right.
I mean, if I'd have come across like that, I wouldn't have been bullied.
Right.
But inside, I felt that anger and that frustration and the awkwardness of not fitting in and not being accepted. And because I had no interest in sport, you know, a boy at school who's not interested in football is a very strange boy indeed in the eyes of the other boys, you know. So a very lonely life as well. I had one close friend, and others I got along with all right and liked them, but I always felt detached. And I now know this is all part and parcel of being on the autism spectrum, of course.
Right.
So, but back then it felt like nobody understood it. Nobody, certainly teachers didn't. You know, I didn't perform that well at school. And I was just dismissed as someone who was a little bit slow on the uptake, didn't grasp things quickly enough. And my grades weren't that great when I came out. They weren't poor, but they were average. You know, I had a couple of high grades, and one, of course, was in English language, which is, of course, being a writer comes from that.
You know, here, I said that it may have been a couple of years for the Colin Baker episodes to reach us. That may not have been the case. It may have been more like a couple of months. Because when I started watching in the 80s, Tom Baker was on. It sounds like you and I have had very similar experiences. Tom Baker was, you know, my doctor, and I remember when it changed to Peter Davison, and my fascination with Peter Davison was that the show was so different. And back then, if we were to mention Doctor Who to our friends or teachers or what have you, no one would know what we were talking about because nobody knew what Doctor Who was. And of course, we didn't have the internet. And the thing with the British accents, when I couldn't understand what they were saying half the time. And so it was very difficult for me to understand what actually is going on here. And I think that may have had caused a lot of my interest, that I wanted to know and I wanted to understand this. So when Colin Baker came along, that had been the second time that this weird Doctor Who thing had changed. And I was not able to understand his accent very well. And we didn't have an ability to watch it again since it was not out on tape. You would actually have to record it on a VCR yourself. And I did start doing that eventually, where I could replay them and listen to try to understand what was being said, and to try to absorb and understand the complex stories. So even though you and I are the same age, and it sounds like we started watching around at the same time, it seems that we have very different experiences with it.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, you
Well,
being in the UK and
yeah,
me
some
being
of
in the
it's
States.
cultural. Some of it's cultural, isn't it? The difference. I remember, this is not to do with Doctor Who, but just to give you an example, I wrote a children's book, and a gentleman in America called James Maxon is actually an author himself. What's his book called? He wrote a children's book called The Cat That Made Nothing Something Again. It was something like that.
Hmm.
Where this cat comes into people's lives and transforms seemingly difficult situations into good situations. Um, yeah, but anyway, James Maxon, he read one of my books and I read his. We sort of did an exchange, and then he got in touch with me and asked me what a pavement is, uh, which was staggered me. But a pavement is a sidewalk. Uh, So you guys say, "Oh, I went for a walk. I went down the sidewalk,
Okay.
across the road."
Okay.
Where we call a sidewalk a pavement, and
Okay.
it amazed me that he didn't know what a pavement was.
I'd never heard of
So,
that myself.
well, there you go then. So you relating that story that you couldn't understand half of it.
Right.
When Colin Baker came, I can believe you just from that one
Yeah.
experience with James Maxon.
Yeah.
That we think that Britain and America are so similar, and yet in many ways they're not, are they? It's the little
Right.
subtle details where it's very different.
I think I learn a new word every single time I watch a new episode of Doctor Who that I had never heard of before. Okay, so now I am going to read the advertisement from Penguin Publishing for the Resurrection Plant. I'm about 99% certain that you're not going to be sharing any spoilers with us today of this unreleased story. And here's what it says on penguin.co.uk. Fraser Hines reads a brand new story featuring the second Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe. The TARDIS brings its occupants to Calico 3, an Earth-like planetoid where industrial foundries are worked alongside of sophisticated technology. The Doctor is staggered to learn about the resurrection plant, which rebirths anyone mortally wounded in the line of work. While Jamie is put to work in the foundry, Zoe and the Doctor investigate the plant, but the machine goes terribly wrong and they must work with the locals to combat a horrifying monster. The Doctor also uncovers a shameful secret that, at least for him, hits close to home.
Mm.
Fraser Hines, who played Jamie in the TV series, reads Will Hadcroft's intriguing adventure. Now, with that being said, I really want to hear this as soon as possible. And I will because I have pre ordered it both digitally for streaming and the CD.
Yeah.
And I ordered the digital stream because I'm not waiting for the mail. I want to hear this on August 4th when it comes out. So, how do you feel about this description of your story? And if it hits too close to home with details that you can't speak of yet, feel free to elaborate on the cover art. And do you happen to know who the cover art is by?
I did, but I've forgotten his name. Because they haven't published online, they haven't published who designed the cover. Is he called Lee? Lee. Oh, this is so frustrating.
I think I've actually already found out who it was, and I cannot remember that right now.
No.
What?
I looked up one of the previous ones. I looked at one of the Paul Mars ones that I bought to see who the designer was, so I could get the name. I got it from the sleeve notes inside, but
Okay.
I can't remember it now. Yeah. Oh well, sorry, Lee, if you're watching. If indeed you are called Lee. Um, what was the question now? What do I like the blurb, the description? Yes, I do.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
that it does describe it accurately,
Uh-huh.
and it does tell you just enough to whet your appetite, but leaves out some details, so we don't give the game away right
Right.
from the start.
Okay.
As for having got it on order, at the time of us recording this, I still haven't heard it.
Okay.
So everybody seems to think that the author gets a copy way in advance. No, I've been told by my producer, Michael Stevens, I'll get author copies just a few days before the release. So,
Okay.
you know, it might well be that I get to hear it when you do.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's getting close.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about the writing process in as much detail as possible? Was it something as simple as sitting down at a typewriter one day with a blank piece of paper and just typing Doctor Who, The Resurrection Plant by Will Hadcroft? Or was it something more complex than that?
Well, I'm having ideas all the time, and all writers do. Um, and the idea for this one, I thought of it years ago. It was originally called The Sanctity of Death. That was its title. And the idea being that if you are worked to death and resurrected back to life, and then worked to death again and resurrected back to life over and over and over, then the phrase the sanctity of life has no meaning, because there is no sanctity in it if you live in that kind of experience. So that's why I call it the sanctity of death. And that's the title I still prefer.
Okay.
And so basically, I had the idea of people being in an industrial setting, people being literally worked to death, brought back to life, and so on, over and over. I had the idea of the machine that does it going wrong, so that well, I can't tell you too much detail because it will
Right.
spoil it.
Well,
But,
yeah,
but
that's
basically, the thing that goes wrong results in this monster being created that goes on the rampage. I'll tell you that much.
okay.
And originally, the story was the Seventh Doctor and Ace. And I either, my memory might be playing tricks on me now. My memory is that I submitted it to Virgin New Adventures. So that would have been in the early 1990s. But it's possible that I might have submitted it actually to BBC Books as one of their past Doctor adventures after 1996, after the TV movie with Paul McGann.
Okay. And this
BBC,
is when it would have been a Seventh Doctor and Ace story
yeah, and it would have
titled
been
The Sanctity of
of
Death.
death. Yeah. So what
Okay.
you do is you get a chapter breakdown. So chapter 1, you write what happens in chapter 1 as a paragraph, and chapter 2, and you work your way down the entire thing, in very simply told, who the characters are, what happens to them, what their backgrounds are. A good story has characters that feel real and believable.
Right.
So you have to give them backstories, even if you don't use all the backstory. If you give each character some background so they feel solid and real, and they react to one another in a realistic way. So you have all of that going on in your mind as you're putting the thing together. And then you have to write 3 sample chapters. This is if you're sending a book proposal in. 3 sample chapters to demonstrate your ability to write, and also how the story would play out. So that's the original version from 1990, whatever it was. With the audio, what happened was BBC Audio Originals. I think my story is number 13, so they've not been going very long, this particular range. And what happened was, producer Michael Stevens and the editor John Ainsworth decide that they want to try some new writers in the range. And John knew me. I've known John since 2005. He's been involved with 1 or 2 projects of mine in the past that are not related to Doctor Who. So he knew I was a writer. He knew I wrote other things outside of Doctor Who, and he knew I had a professional approach. So I think I'd met him at Big Finish Day, the convention in Derby, Derby Quad, it's called, the location in Derbyshire. And he was there as the chaperone or the steward to Jan Chappell, who played Callie in Blake 7. She was going to be interviewed on stage at Big Finish Day. And I just bumped into him after not seeing him for quite some time afterwards. And we had a bit of a chat and we had a bit of a catch up. And I just happened to say, John, if you're ever in a position to hire writers, don't forget me. And some time elapsed. I can't remember if it was over a year or just a few months, but some time elapsed. And I just got an email from John Ainsworth, BBC Audio Originals.
Okay.
And he's, Michael and I are looking for new writers. Would you like to submit some ideas? I submitted 3. And one of them was The Sanctity of Death. And what I did was just a couple of paragraphs, the basic concept of the story, gave them that, along with the other 2 storylines. And they settled for that one and said, we're interested in that. Can you then write us a 2-page storyline? So then you have to flesh it out more, give more detail from beginning to end, the entire thing in 2 pages, 2 A4 pages. And what I decided to do, because obviously I was keen, because this wasn't a commission, this was just show us some more detail. So it could have fallen through at that point. It could have said no, even then. So I thought, what I'll do is, there's a particular scene, it's the penultimate scene of the story, second to the last scene. And there's a particular exchange between the doctor and the villain of the piece. And I really liked it. That you'll know what I mean when you hear it. So I thought I will write that up as prose to demonstrate how I write prose and demonstrate the flavor and the mood and the tone of the story and what it would be like. And I even recorded myself reading it just to see how it sounds when someone reads it out loud. I didn't send them the recording, but I did send them the example of that penultimate scene. And it was based on the 2-page synopsis and the scene that I'd written that they commissioned it. And I thought, right, I'm going to go into this as professionally as I can. I know that it's a collaborative effort, you know. I can't go around making demands and saying I don't want to change this and I don't want to change that. Right. A professional person, a professional writer knows it's never right on the first draft. It can't be. So you go through a backwards and forwards exchange with your editor, changing things each time. It went through 5 drafts before we finally got it right. But the thing that really killed me at the time, I'm over it now, but the thing that really killed me at the time was the first thing they wanted to change was the title.
Okay.
And I thought, no, I love that title.
So they changed it from The Sanctity of Death to The Resurrection Plan.
Yeah. The reasoning.
Why? Do you know why?
Yeah, the reasoning is that while The Sanctity of Death sounds very emotive and poetic, it doesn't really say what the story is about. And that when someone's browsing through the CDs in their store, you know, or they're browsing online on Amazon or whatever, and they're looking through the titles, you want a title that kind of tells you what it is, and that arouses your interest. So they felt that because the story revolves around this resurrection plant, not an actual plant like a tree or a flower. I mean, some people thought, when they came to me, they asked me, is it about a tree or a flower?
That's what I thought. The first time I saw it,
makes you come back to life. Yeah. So their reasoning isn't as sound as they thought it was, because people still don't know what it's about.
Right.
But I understood what they meant. That Sanctity of Death is, you know, has a certain ring to it, but it doesn't tell you anything, where the resurrection plant does. It's something that's bringing people back to life, and that will then make you look on the back to read the blurb and see what it's about, and then hopefully you will purchase it. So I understood it. It was a marketing decision rather than a creative one. And I thought, well, yeah, I can see what you mean. So I very reluctantly made that change. But there were other changes. I mean, I wrote far too much, for example. I just have a drink of water. I wrote far too much. I think it's 10,000 words for an hour-long story.
Mhm.
And I wrote something like 30,000.
Oh, wow.
So then, John said, this is just far too much here. So then we had to be really ruthless in getting rid of all sorts of stuff that wasn't really necessary to tell the story. The things that I wanted to do was give some backstory to the family who are in this right there from the beginning. And you kind of go into the story through their eyes and experience the resurrection plant through things that happened to their family. And I wanted to show what the family was like as a unit before all this stuff started happening to them and before the doctor and his companions arrived.
With a lot of character development of the family.
Yeah. I wanted to draw the listener in so that when things started to go wrong for them, you really felt for them, that you felt like that these were real people and this is awful what's happening. But I wrote, a good 3 pages of A4 just on that. And John said, well, really, we need the doctor to arrive in it a lot earlier than that, So all that had to go. And there are other things that had to go. I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but we got rid of, it's funny though, we got rid of a lot. And yet all the core ideas are still there. It is the same story and it's all the better for it. I'm very happy with the final draft. So I'm not one of these writers who moans and groans, oh, they made me get rid of loads of stuff. I can see it was necessary and it is better for it.
Very good.
I can't wait to hear the end result. I've heard from 1 or 2 who've already heard it, that it sounds really, really good. The sound design on it is spectacular.
Do you know who the sound designer is?
It's David Rucroft.
Okay. He's done some of the previous audio originals, I believe.
Yeah. He's a regular that they use, along with Simon Power and various other people. And Fraser, Michael, the producer, said to me after the recording had been made, he got in touch and said, Fraser reads it beautifully. So that's
he seems that he would be the perfect choice because I have heard some of his work for Big Finish where he is doing Patrick Troughton and then switches to Jamie, and it's amazing. So I think this is definitely the correct reader for your story.
Absolutely.
I was going to ask how you came to be not one of the latest writer for BBC Audio Doctor Who, and you have covered that. I was going to ask, was this something as simple as one day you opened your email and found a message from BBC saying, congratulations, we want you to be our newest Doctor Who author? But I believe you've answered that. And just to clarify, you met John Ainsworth from BBC at a Big Finish, at Big Finish Day?
No, I met him originally a long time ago in 2005. John's association with audio goes right back to audio visual, as I say.
Okay.
So
exactly.
So he got involved with them. Then when Big Finish got started, he was one of those core people at the beginning with Gary Russell and Nicholas Briggs. John was the PR and marketing guy for them. He also script edited some of them. He directed some of them. He'd already kind of established himself long before I met him. But what happened was he lived in London and then he moved back to his roots for a short time. And he lived in the northwest of England where I live. And he lived in a town called Horwich. And I, back then, worked in an office, an ordinary, mundane office job. And what happened was John, his partner was a gardener, and was earning more than enough for the pair of them. They were a landscape gardener, but John was not working in the media at that point. He'd edited magazines like Cult Times. He'd worked for Big Finish, and he was between media jobs. So just for a few months, he took a job at the office where I worked, and ended up being what they call my manager said, right, we've got this new guy starting on Monday. Do you want to be his buddy? In other words, you will train him. You will be the person he refers to when he has questions. So I said, yeah, not knowing it was John.
Oh,
and
small world.
So he comes in on a Monday morning, and I don't know what John Ainsworth looks like at that point. I just know the name. So
Right.
I'm talking to him and just making conversation on that first morning. And I just said, what were you doing before this, John? And he said, oh, I've done a little bit of magazine editing and a bit of audio work. I edited a magazine called Cult Times. And I said, I've bought some of those. Cult Times magazine. It's Visual Imagination, who published TV Zone magazine. And he said, do you like Doctor Who at all? I said, yeah, I love it. I have done all my life, you know. And he said, have you heard of Big Finish Productions at all? I'm sure you will have done. And I said, have I heard of them? I've got half of them.
Right.
And then the realization that this is John Ainsworth from Big Finish.
Wow.
So what happens is, over this period of months, not many months, the work in the media world starts to pick up again for him. So he comes to work in this part-time job because he said to me he wanted some structure to his day. He didn't want to sit at home while his partner was doing the landscape gardening. He wanted some structure to his day. So he took this part-time job for a few months. And then what he would do is do the job and be sat next to me. And then on Friday afternoon, he'd have this backpack with all this stuff in it. And he was going down to the railway station to catch a train to London to direct a Big Finish. And he would go spend the weekend down there and then come back on Monday, back to the boring office job. And I was just staggered.
I can imagine.
So I loved it. The period of time where he worked there and with me, I absolutely loved that. And my colleagues at the time imagined and used to say to me, "You'll be on your way now. Now you've met him, because they knew I'd published a children's novel, and they knew I wanted to be a writer and to be involved with Doctor Who. But that didn't happen, of course, because that's not how it happens. People don't just say, "Hey, why don't you come and write Doctor Who for us?" when you've got no real experience as a script writer,
right?
Apart from that one-off, the Cathay Factor, that fan production.
Well,
They're not going to take a chance on someone who's never done it professionally. So it's taken from then to now. The path, Grego, is that, and John was kind of the start of it, really. I'd already had a small novel published, and then John he sent me in the direction, after he'd left the office job, he sent me in the direction of a publisher called Tim Hurst Books. And Hurst Books were publishing first-time writers, but who were Doctor Who fans. And then it started to publish people who were in Doctor Who. For example, Colin Baker published a collection of newspaper articles that he'd written, and the book was called Look Who's Talking, and it was Hurst Books who published that. So he was starting to progress as a publisher, but unfortunately the business collapsed. So we never got to do my children's series Android through Hurst, because that was the idea. That's what we were going to do. But we did inherit from Hurst a wonderful proofreader, copy editor called Alistair Mackenzie, and a gentleman called Jack D recommended an artist called Owen Claxton, marvelous artist. This we'll go over this a little bit later on, I think.
Okay.
But so I was starting to become known in that world, if you like. So around the, well, just before that, before John going back to Big Finish and Hearst, a lady called Teresa Cutts, this is in 2009, she sent me an email. She'd read one of my books, got it out the library. I'd written a book about Asperger's syndrome, and she got it out the library and wanted to quote some lines from it in an essay she was writing for a college course. And so I said, yeah, of course you can. And then she said, well, you know, what are you doing next? And at that time, I become so disillusioned with the way things were going in publishing that I was thinking of packing it in. I'll just show you, see where have I put it? Here we are. This is, when I talk about the small press Android, this is Android. You see that? Android and Century Lodge.
A beautiful cover.
That was published by CK Publishing in 2002, a Northwest-based publisher. And sadly, they went out of business. They couldn't sustain it. But this was my first attempt at being published. So 89,000 words thereabouts, Android and Century Lodge. And I wanted to make that into a series. So it's about a robot schoolgirl and 3 youngsters who take care of her. Mm-hmm. And of course, the villains are the evil scientists who want to uncover her secrets and build the world's first robot soldier.
Now, this was published?
This was published, yeah, by CK Publishing. So I'd already had this.
Okay.
I'd already had this under my belt by the time I met John.
Okay.
Then when I started to, I read in Doctor Who magazine an article by Gary Gillett, who was either, I don't know if he was still the editor, but he was certainly an editor and one of the longest serving editors of Doctor Who magazine. And he wrote this piece called The Fan Gene about how fans obsess over Doctor Who. And he related a story in that situation where he was at a Doctor Who convention and an actress from Doctor Who was talking to him at the bar. And he said to her, what is it, do you think, that makes Doctor Who fans do this, get together at conventions and obsess over it the way we do? And the actress said to him, oh, I think you're all a little bit autistic. Mm-hmm. And that got him interested in researching autism. And he found Asperger's syndrome. So it's got all the traits of classic autism, if you like, but very much on the thin end of the wedge. So that got me thinking about Asperger's and relating my problems and issues of my youth and my teenage years, and realizing that I'm on the spectrum. And this Asperger's syndrome explains so much of what had baffled me over the years. I got in touch with Jessica Kingsley Publishers, who specialized in autism and Asperger's, and I sent them Android and said, I think Android, the character, is like a child with Asperger's syndrome. And Jessica Kingsley dropped me an email one day in 2003 and said, I feel the same. And they republished Android and Century Lodge as an Asperger adventure. So that's the same novel as the previous one, but reissued and marketed towards children with Asperger's. Okay. So I was starting to make waves in publishing, see. So my friend who got in touch, Teresa Cutts, who got in touch in 2009 and said, what are you doing next? I had tried to get a series off the ground, because I knew that Android and Century Lodge is sold in the low hundreds. So I wanted to build on that with a sequel.
Okay, so one of the questions, it's my understanding that you were also submitting stories to Big Finish and Virgin Publishing. And but I wanted to clarify something real quick before we move
Okay.
on. With the resurrection plant, which
Yeah.
was previously called the Sanctity of Death, did you
Mm.
say that you started work on that in 1990 or the 1990s?
Yeah. Yeah. It would.
Seriously?
Yeah. It would have. The basic idea for it, certainly. Yeah. Would have been,
Wow.
if it was Virgin Publishing, it would have been between 1991 and 1996. If it was BBC Books, it would have been between 96 and
So
2005,
you mean
would
to
have been.
tell me that your story that comes out on August 4th, The Resurrection Plant on BBC Audio, was a work in progress for 3 decades?
The very beginnings of it certainly were, yeah.
Okay,
There's so
wow.
the things I've told you were all in that original premise about people dying, worked to death and brought back and worked to death, and the idea of
Wow.
the monster was there. There's a new element that I brought into it, because when I revisited it, I felt it was a bit thin. We needed something else going on. And I
Okay.
also needed to explain how they'd come by the technology to resurrect people.
Okay.
So once I came up with the idea that explains that, the whole thing then took on a new life. Um, and some of it involves the Doctor's own mysterious history, not his own personal history, but in 1969, when season 6 was broadcast, we knew nothing about the Doctor at all. All we knew is he'd stolen the TARDIS and run off from his own people. And after
Right.
that, we didn't know who his own people were. We didn't know the name of the planet. We didn't know what their society was. When he changed form from Hartnell to Troughton, was that something only he could do? Or did they all do it?
Right.
So that was the world that season 6 was broadcast to, a world that knew nothing of the Doctor's origin. So I
Right.
thought, when I had my light bulb moment for the additional material, I thought, oh, we can really play around with some of this now. Because we're in an era where the Doctor is not liberally talking about his home world, on where he's from and what he is at all. In fact, quite the opposite, he's keeping it very secret. So that's an element that was brought in 2019. I added it to the original idea,
Okay.
but a lot of it is still the original thing, yeah, from the
Wow.
1990s.
Unbelievable. That's unbelievable.
But I'd just like to say, Gregor, just to get this thread to John Ainsworth so that you understand it. So
Mhm.
what happened was, after Android and Century Lodge and the Asperger's one, I made contact. If I'm just finding his book, I had a long time pen pal called Darrell Sloan. It's based in Northern Ireland, and he'd been working on self-publishing. He'd written a book called Chaon, which is spelled Chion. So it's spelled Chion, but pronounced Chaon.
Mhm.
And it means like snow. And it's basically, this substance falls in the night that's like snow, but it actually isn't snow. When you touch it, you're stuck to it. If you touch it with your fingers, you can't get your hand away. If you stand on it, you can't walk anywhere. If you fall in it, you can't get up. A really
Mhm.
innovative idea. And he came by this print on demand company called Lightning Source, and he used that to produce this. This is it. This is Chaon by Darrell Sloan. And I was very intrigued by how he'd come by the technology to make this. But instead of printing, 1,000 copies and storing them in a warehouse, and then if you can't sell them all, you have to pay for the storage. Well, print on demand's not like that. It produces one book at a time per order. So if 100 people
Really?
order a copy each, it can print 100 of them and send them out. But if only one person orders a copy, it can produce just one and send it out. So
Wow.
it's a
I've
very
never heard of
cost
that
effective.
before.
Yeah, and so I was very interested in that as a possible way of keeping Android going. See, so
Mhm.
I got K-On! And I loved the story and was very enthused by it. So I got Daryl to work with me on the first Android sequel, which is this one, Android in the House of Shadows.
Now, is this
Um,
available now?
yeah,
You can get online and order it right now?
you could pick one up easily, yeah.
Yeah.
Although we are working on republishing the whole thing. It would be nice if a mainstream publisher wanted to take it on and republish it, start again. Because I have a third one that's out and a fourth one on my computer that's not been published. So it's a continuous series. If any mainstream publishers out there are interested.
Well, you're actually about ready to get a lot of attention, having become the newest BBC Audio Doctor Who author.
Yeah, well, when this came out in 2008, it didn't do very well at all. I'm not a sales and marketing person. I barely sold 50 copies of this when it came out. So that's why I say when Teresa Cutts got in touch in 2009, I was ready for giving up. And she said to me, but why are you giving up? You've got this talent. So I said, well, I can produce the stuff, but I can't sell it. And she said, well, I work in PR and sales. So how about I help you sell it? So that led to John Ainsworth around the same time or sometime after that. He's pointed me in the direction of Hearst Books, and then that fell through. So then what Teresa and I decided to do was set up our own little publishing imprint called Fabulous Books, FBS for short. And we began to publish, initially using this as a vehicle to publish my own work. So the third Android is this one. We published this one under FBS, Android and the Ghosts of Winter Hill. Winter Hill is just, you can see it from my back window, actually. It's that thing there with the red lights on it is a television transmitter.
Okay.
On Winter Hill, which is visible from my back window. So Android and the Ghosts of Winter Hill was the third one. And then we began to, and that cover, when I mentioned earlier, about Owen Claxton, that Jack Dexter, who was associated with Hearst Books, recommended to me Owen Claxton. He painted that picture. So we hired Owen to do the artwork. And quite stunning. And we had Alistair Mackenzie, the proofreader, who we inherited from Hearst. So it's a shame that Mr. Hearst's company collapsed. But something that was fortuitous for me later was that he inherited a couple of these people, which helped us set up our own thing. And we use print-on-demand technology, so it didn't cost a fortune to produce these things. And if they didn't sell that well, we hadn't lost anything. We hadn't made any money, but we hadn't lost any money either. So it was, you couldn't lose. There's no way of losing. So we started to produce this stuff ourselves, and we used to get John Ainsworth. I approached John Ainsworth because we needed somebody who knew their way around a computer program called InDesign, to do the typesetting and graphics.
I'm sorry, you broke up there a little bit, Will. What was the name of that again?
InDesign, it's called.
Okay.
It's a computer program for graphics and typesetting. Because I knew John had worked in magazines, I dropped him a line and said, do you use InDesign? And he said, yes. And I said, would you mind joining us and doing the typesetting and graphics on some of our titles? So I was back involved with John Ainsworth again. See?
Again, there we go.
So there's this. So it starts off in my office job. He recommends a publisher to me, and that doesn't work out. Then John's back in again with Fabulous Books, the thing that me and Teresa are doing. He's seeing what we're producing. That's nothing to do with Doctor Who. So you can see I'm not a Doctor Who fan who fantasizes about writing Doctor Who's, but never writes anything, because some are like that. They say, I would love to do one, but they don't get the ball rolling, and they don't.
Right.
Someone who is a writer writes whether they're successful or not. It's in them to do it. And I was sort of demonstrating. I wasn't thinking that I was doing that at the time, but when I look back now, I can see I was demonstrating to John that I could do it. So when Michael,
Very interesting.
the producer, said to him, let's get some new blood for the audio originals, he thought of me.
Nice. Very interesting. Now, when you mentioned that a Colin Baker publication, was that through Hearst or Fabulous?
Right. So you're talking about Look Who's Talking.
Look Who's Talking. Yes,
So yeah,
I have that.
Yeah, Hearst Books published
Okay.
that. Yeah. So Colin
Okay.
Baker wrote for his local free newspaper called Books Free Press. Books is short for Buckinghamshire, where he lives. So he wrote a regular column for his local paper. And then Tim Hearst, said to him, how do you fancy gathering all of these articles together into a book? And we'll publish it. So they did. Look Who's Talking. It sold very well. So Colin was persuaded to do a second one called Second Thoughts with Hearst.
Mm-hmm.
And then the company collapsed.
Now this was in 2009?
This would have been around then, yeah.
Around 2009? Okay.
Yeah, around then. 9, 10, somewhere around there. Because Teresa Cutts got in touch with me in 2009, and Hearst was still in, very much in existence then, definitely. It may have been like 2011, 2012 when it discontinued. Okay. So I knew that Colin had done these books. So I was bumping into him at Doctor Who convention. And I first met Colin when I was 15 in Blackpool, the seaside resort, where there was a big Doctor Who exhibition. And I happened to be in there in August 1984. So Twin Dilemma had been broadcast in March, and that was the last of that season. And then in August, I just happened to go on holiday for a day trip with my family to Blackpool, and I'm in the Doctor Who exhibition, not knowing that down the road at the Pleasure Beach, Colin Baker had just opened a new ride on the Pleasure Beach and was in full costume as the Doctor to do that. Really? And then they said, well, let's go to the Doctor Who exhibition. So they drove him up to the Doctor Who exhibition. So I'm in the Doctor Who exhibition in the little gift shop. And I just bought the theme tune, single record, the 45 of the theme music. And I already owned the Peter Howell version as a single when Tom Baker was the Doctor. And then when Peter Davison took over, I bought it again because I wanted the cover with Peter Davison on. And then when the Doctor changed to Colin Baker, I bought it again because I wanted Colin's face on it.
There we go.
That was a single theme from the BBC TV series by Peter Howell.
Yeah.
And I had it in my hands, and my mother came running in from the back entrance of the exhibition down all these stone steps, and she had a bathing costume on, and she was covered in dry sand, and she was shouting, William, Doctor Who's here, Doctor Who's here. Really? So she'd seen all the commotion outside that I was unaware of. And then almost immediately after she said it, I could hear his voice in the corridor on the other side in the darkness, commenting on one of the exhibits. And I remember him saying, oh, you wouldn't want to meet that on a dark night, would you? And I can remember the hairs going up on the back of my neck, because that voice, you know who it is. There's no mistake. Yeah. And then suddenly he walks out of the shadows into the gift shop. And there he is, Doctor Who, standing right in front of me. And I was just sort of like that.
And you're 15 and this is the Doctor.
Yeah. And I was really, really obsessed with it. And of course, I just, before we had a VCR, I used to tape record the audio soundtrack off television while it was being broadcast. So I could play back the soundtrack like a radio play. And I had the Twin Dilemma on audio cassette, because I'd recorded it off TV, and I'd listened to it loads of times since the broadcast, and I knew it by heart. I knew the dialogue by heart, and I really loved Colin's incarnation of the Doctor. And I just stood there with this record in my hand like that, and my mother snatched it out of my hand and said, "Will you sign my lad's record for me, please?"
There we go.
I was frozen with, I was just in total awe of him. So he said, "Certainly," and he got a pen and he wrote on the back, "To Will, or William, it would have been then, to William, best wishes, Colin Baker, who, question mark, that's how he always signed it off. And years and years later, in the, it would have been the early 2000s, or the late 1990s or the early 2000s, he did an evening with Colin Baker in Chester, which is quite a few miles down the road from here. And I decided to attend that. And I took this record, and I'd been in touch with him, and he knew that I'd met him in the Doctor Who exhibition in 1985, but he'd never met me and didn't know what I looked like. So I was able to go up to him after the event and say, "Will you sign my record, please, Colin?" And he said, "Certainly." And then he looked on the back, and you can't see it on here, Gregor, because this is the original signing. It's all faded away now, because he wrote it in felt tip. It's gone. But at the time that I showed him, it was still visible. And I just said, "You'll see that you've already signed it, Colin. You did that in 1985 in the Doctor Who exhibition in Blackpool."
In Blackpool.
He just he looked at me and he said, "Do I have the privilege of addressing Will?"
Really?
So that's how I established contact with him as an adult.
Wow.
And then he signed it again for me in Cairo.
Okay. I was actually going to say, get him to sign it again, and you did.
Yeah. So because of that, and then seeing him at Comic Cons and various conventions, he knew who I was, and we have a bit of a history there of a kind. And so then I was, and he knew that Teresa and I were doing this publishing thing, FBS, Fabulous Books. So I just said to him, "How do you fancy doing another collection of newspaper articles as a book?" And he said, "Let me find it. Where is it? Here we are." And he did do it. So we published the third volume, Sixth Sense. There you go. And the cover is by Owen Claxton once again. And I've never been too happy with the font there. Not the font, but the color. It's in silver, and I'm not sure if we should have done it in white, actually, looking at it now. It doesn't stand out enough, the title. It blends in too much with the artwork, I feel. But there's Colin working at his desk,
right,
like a sort of Victorian scribe with his quill pen, writing his articles.
Okay, and when was this published, Sixth Sense?
Well, this came out in, let me see. Where's the publishing year? 2016. It came out in 2016. Yeah.
Okay, so that is
still available.
Yeah.
And then off the back of that, I don't know if you want to talk about his daughter's book.
Yeah. Let's see that.
This is,
what's really interesting about Sixth Sense is 2016. I was very avidly collecting books, and I don't believe I have that. I'm wondering. You and your company published that.
Yeah, that's Fabulous Books. Yeah, and it's still available. The great thing, like I said before about print on demand, is nothing goes out of print. So if somebody says, "Oh, I wouldn't mind that," and they're the only person in the world who wants it, they can still order it.
Well, you're going to get an order for it soon, because I want to pick that up. I'm actually surprised that I had not heard of that, because I've been paying attention to new publications, especially by someone that performed as the Doctor. And you said that his daughter also wrote a book?
Yeah, well, what happened was his daughter Lucy Baker, she had some ideas for children's books, and she had an illustrator, Robin Diamond, and was looking for a publisher. So we got in touch because we knew that she was looking for a publisher. So we got in touch and said, well, what have you got? And she showed us a couple of ideas. And one of them was Rhino Wants a Wife, which is a children's book. Show it there. There you go. Rhino Wants a Wife
by Lucy Baker. Lucy Baker.
Yeah. Illustrated by Robin Diamond. Yeah. And the idea of this story is this rhinoceros in the jungle and his friend Monkey. Rhino has decided it's time to get married and it's time to find a life partner, but he doesn't know what he should be looking for. So in the story, he's going round all the different animals in the jungle, asking them what they think is the ideal partner. I'll read you a little excerpt from it. So
okay.
This is
awesome.
Just to give you a flavor of it. So it's written in that kind of rhyming style that Winnie the Pooh and books like that are written in.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Giraffe. Okay.
Okay.
And Rhino and Monkey approach Giraffe and ask Giraffe what she thinks is the ideal partner.
Mm-hmm.
So Giraffe says, well, the perfect wife must be as tall as a tower, with a neck that is graceful and lean. She must have a calm, gentle nature, fluttering eyelashes, and a gallop that is swift and serene. Great, said Rhino, and off he went to find a wife. So clearly what Giraffe is describing in actual fact, with the fluttering eyelashes and the very long neck, is a giraffe.
Right, right.
which is not the ideal partner for Rhino. And so each animal in this story reacts in that way. So like the tortoise, the turtle is saying, well, what you're really looking for is someone with a very hard sort of shell. That's the tortoise's ideal partner. And of course, I don't think we're giving anything away to say, because there aren't going to be small children watching this interview.
Right. Here, can we see that cover of that again?
Yeah.
Can you show us the cover of that?
Yeah, there you go.
Rhino Wants a Wife by Lucy Baker.
Lucy Baker. In the end, of course, in the last couple of pages, Rhino meets another rhino and then has the perfect partner. And that's the moral of the story, really.
Right.
You can't go around asking other people what's perfect for them, because it might not be perfect for you.
Exactly.
And Teresa and I, we fell in love with this idea. I said, yeah, let's do that one. Rhino Wants a Wife. So, if you're a Doctor Who fan with small children, or you just like children's books, I can't recommend this highly enough. It's a sweet story. Rhino Wants a Wife by Lucy Baker.
And could we see the cover of the Sixth Sense again, if you don't mind?
Yeah. Where have I put it?
The 2016.
Where are you, Colin? Oh, here he is.
Colin Baker there.
Yeah. So this is it. I'll zoom in. Okay.
And you say the font is in silver, and you were thinking, because on the computer screen it looks white.
Does it look good then?
Yeah. It looks really nice, actually.
We had to cram his name in there. That dog wasn't in the artwork originally. Okay. And Colin said, will you put my dog Henry in it, please? And we thought, well, it's going to obscure your name, Colin, because there's nowhere else to put your name. Okay, if Colin Baker says put my dog Henry in, you're not going to say no, are you? So, so we put Henry, Owen the artist put Henry there at the bottom, but it does obscure his name. You can't see it clearly. Okay. But I really like this. A lot of stuff in this has nothing to do with Doctor Who. It's what Colin is like. Is very sharp, very quick-witted, and very opinionated. And all the little accounts are about everyday life and the minutiae of life. There are some Doctor Who things in it, but there are a lot of funny observations about everyday life. I can't recommend this highly enough either.
What's on the back of that?
Baker.
Can
This
we
is
see the back?
yeah, that's a painting of Colin done by
Is that
Owen
it?
Clapton.
It looks like a
That
painting of Colin Baker.
it is, yeah. It's based on a
Yeah.
photograph. So Colin supplied the photograph, and
Okay.
Owen Claxton painted it up.
Very
Because
interesting.
Owen works in oil paintings, you see, so you get
I'm,
a real quality piece when he produces something.
okay. Well, I'm looking forward to reading that. That's very interesting and nice to learn of. Um, okay, wrapping up the whole publishing section of this interview, I did have one more small question here.
Yeah.
In situations where your stories were not accepted by BBC, Virgin, or Big Finish in the past, did they ever give you any reasons as to why? Such as uh, let's not call them rejected stories, but let's refer to them as not accepted at present.
Yeah.
um, were
Well,
you ever given reasons that, were you just met with silence, or were they considered not viable? Did you ever get a letter in the mail or something from BBC or Big Finish that explained why your submissions were not considered viable at that time?
well, first of all, most things you send off, you don't get a reply at
So you
all.
don't hear anything.
No. And then on the occasions when you do, it's very obviously a standard letter that is sent out to everybody, and they've just put your name in at the top. Uh,
Mhm.
I had one. I had one situation where I submitted something to a publisher. It was to an agent, a literary agent, um, and the agent's letter came back, and it was this sort of, I can see you're quite talented, and you've tried very hard with this, blah blah blah. Unfortunately, you've not been successful this time. Keep trying. And then
Mhm.
some months later, in the same year, I sent them something completely different. And then when I got the rejection notice, it was the exact same letter.
Oh, it's a form
I
letter.
can see, because first time round I fell for it. I thought that they were commenting on my talent
Right.
as a writer.
Right.
Second time round, I realized they sent that thing to everybody.
Oh no, that's terrible.
So that's a negative example. There are some
Yeah.
positives. One of my very early attempts was when Virgin Publishing had the Target books, the Target novelizations. This is before the New Adventures. And Target did one book called Junior Doctor Who. It was Doctor Who and the Giant Robot, excuse
Hmm.
me, by Terence Dix. But they'd
Yep.
done a
I
simplified
have
version
that.
of it. Do you remember
Yeah,
that?
I have it.
You've got it,
Hmm.
right.
I've read it. Yeah.
So I thought, why don't I do a Junior Doctor Who?
Hmm.
Even though they didn't have a range for that, it was a one-off. It wasn't a range,
Hmm.
but this is the signs of an amateur writer who thinks is so good. What your work is so good, they're just going to accept it and create a whole new range based on your submission. They're not. No, that's not going. It's not going to happen.
Right.
But when you're in your late teens, you think it might.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're inclined to think you're that. Wait till they read this, then they'll want to do it all.
Yeah.
And the editor was a gentleman called Nigel Robinson, who
Hmm.
wrote some of the novelizations. And I sent him something called Doctor Who and the Junior Doctor Who and the Mandroids, it was called.
Hmm.
And I sent it off. And then I got the whole manuscript back with a letter from Nigel Robinson. And Nigel Robinson said, I'm afraid we don't have a range of junior Doctor Who's, and we're not going to start one.
Hmm.
And he made some critique of the actual storyline and the story. And then he said, just one sentence that I've never forgotten. He said, but I do think you have some talent as a writer.
Hmm.
And I took it to my mother and went, oh, look, they've rejected my story. And I was very downbeat. And she read the letter. And then she said to me, forget all this other stuff. Focus on that sentence. Because Nigel Robinson is saying you've got something.
Hmm.
You have some talent as a writer. focus on that, take that away from the experience. So I did. And I've never forgotten. I mean, I must have been about 17 or 18 or something when I
And
sent that.
Nigel Robinson provided you with some inspiration in that letter.
Yeah, and encouragement.
Mhm.
Now, he didn't know who I was, you know, he was just being encouraging, and I'm grateful.
Mhm.
You know, I look back on that and I think, well, that's, you know, when you're being completely ignored by most publishers, or you're just getting a standard rejection letter that sent to
Right.
everybody, to
Right.
have a bit of personal critique is valuable, you know.
Yeah.
Other examples, used to I used to send off script ideas to Andrew Cartmel, the script editor of the Sylvester McCoy era. And I'm smiling because what I used to do, this is again the signs of a young man. I remember when Remembrance of the Daleks was transmitted, and I thought, oh, because I wasn't that impressed with season 24. You know, it didn't feel like proper Doctor Who to me. So when Remembrance of the Daleks was screened the following year, brilliant. It's back. This is proper Doctor Who. They've found it. This is how it should be.
Mm-hmm.
And then the following story was the Happiness Patrol, which is I understand that it's an allegory for Margaret Thatcher's government, and it's a bit of it's a bit like Roald Dahl's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and a little bit like Goons the Prisoner, all mixed up. But unfortunately, it just looks like a pantomime. On the surface, it looks like a farcical children's play,
Right.
and a
Right.
giant. We had a company in this country. I don't know if you had them in the States, called Bassett's Sweets, licorice all sorts and this kind of stuff. And the emblem used in TV commercials to promote licorice all sorts by Bassett's Sweets was a character called Bertie Bassett, which was he was comprised of all these different sweets.
Mm-hmm.
And when the Candyman turned up in the Happiness Patrol, everybody who saw it just thought, it's Bertie Bassett.
Oh.
You know, the whole idea of him being this terrible, threatening, frightening thing, to the adults watching it, they just laughed at it and said, oh no, Bertie Bassett's in Doctor Who. So it lost all credibility.
Right.
So what I would do as someone in his late teens is get very angry on behalf of Doctor Who and Doctor Who fans, and I would write in. You know, I'd write to Doctor Who magazine, and I did write to Doctor Who magazine, and you know, praised Remembrance of the Daleks to the skies, and then said, you know, why would you follow that with something like the Happiness Patrol?
Right.
You know, you clearly don't know what you're doing. John Nathan Turner, and I'd slag him off, you know, and I actually, looking back on that now, I'm very embarrassed by it. And because at the time I thought, you know, I'll show them. I'll show John Nathan Turner, you know, he's ruined my favorite program. All these kind of thoughts, and expose him, he's ruined it. Not considering that half the stories of the Davison era and the Colin Baker era and Tom Baker's last season, they were all produced by John Nathan Turner, and I love them.
Yeah, no
so
doubt.
my letter was actually wrong when I was saying, oh, you could have been doing this for 8 years, and why have you only just started doing it now? I was actually wrong in what I was saying.
Well, I can certainly understand that, and I wouldn't want to upset anyone that likes the Happiness Patrol.
Yeah, me too.
But there was a time when I was trying to figure out why the BBC ended Doctor Who in 1989 when they did. And when I watched that episode, it kind of crossed my mind, wondering, is this right here? When it finally
and the public in Britain, the fans were clinging on to it, hoping it would improve. And the general public were dropping off. You know, the viewing figures were going down, and it was you were a laughing stock if you were a fan of Doctor Who at that time. This is, again, I am not being critical of Sylvester McCoy or Andrew Cartmel or John Nathan Turner, but it's just a vibe that was around at the time. So I was being very defensive of the program. The reason I bring this up, Grego, is that I write to Doctor Who magazine, and I'm very proud of my highly critical letter that they published. And
Oh, they did publish it.
they did publish
They
it.
oh,
I don't know which
okay.
issue it is, but it's there.
Yeah.
I guess in 1988, one
Uh-huh.
of those issues. And then I would write to Andrew Cartmel directly and say, Remembrance of Daleks was marvelous. Happiness Patrol, oh dear, that's awful. Silver Nemesis, I'm not sure what to expect with that. And I think The Greatest Show in the Galaxy is probably going to be awful as well. And then Andrew Cartmel would write back to me. This is the point, really, about getting letters off editors and people like that. Because most do not reply. Andrew Cartmel wrote back to me and said, glad you enjoyed Remembrance of the Daleks. I disagree with you about the Happiness Patrol. I think it's a very dark and powerful story, he said. And as for The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, don't prejudge.
Wow.
And I thought, fair enough. But what I then do, having slagged off everything that he's done, half of what he's done that year, and nearly everything he did the previous year as editor, and then send in a story submission. So I come up with a story idea, imagining that they're going to go, wait, this is brilliant, we must make this, after criticizing them so heavily.
Right.
And it never occurred to me at 18 that they might not want to produce something I've written after what I've said about them, So that's the naivety that comes with being a young man.
Right.
Someone who's very obsessed with Doctor Who and very, very passionate. And the passionate sometimes comes out as anger, sadly, and being hypercritical. But also this kind of disconnection with reality. Why would Andrew Cartmel want to produce something that I have sent in when I've criticized his most recent works? Anyway, he still wrote back, I got a reply. I got writer's guidelines sent in the post. These are the things we're looking for. These are the things we're not looking for. They didn't have to do that, John Nathan Turner and Andrew Cartmel. They could have sent a standard reply, basically saying you're not good enough, but they didn't. So I treasure those. I treasure the fact that they took the time to reply. And then when it came to submissions to Virgin and BBC Books, there was one editor. It would have been the BBC Books, I think. So Steve Cole would have been the main editor then, and there was somebody called Ben. He was like a second in command type of thing. Can't remember his surname, but I sent something in. It was the Fourth Doctor and Sarah, and did the synopsis, wrote the 3 sample chapters, sent it in. And he replied, and he said, there's nothing wrong with this as such. It just did not engage me. It simply did not engage me. And again, I was gutted to get a rejection, but he gave me some constructive criticism. It did not engage me. What he was saying really was, it's boring. You've sent us something very boring. So it's written, the writing is okay. The idea is okay, but the way you've written it up, it just did not engage me, and that's why it's been rejected. So that's a positive you can take to heart. I think I really must make sure that whatever I send in, it's got to grab the person reading it. You might think you've come up with this amazing concept, but if the way it's written doesn't draw in the reader, you're not going to get there.
Okay.
So across the years, I've had these little pointers from different editors and people like that have helped develop me. I'm grateful.
Okay.